Alrighty everyone, hello, and welcome back to yet another episode of my nonsense. And unfortunately today, none of Belok's nonsense, as you no doubt hear. He's flapping and bapping because he's already in his cage, because I have to go directly after I film this, and little boy cannot be outside his cage while I am gone. That is a great way for him to otherwise get into everything he shouldn't be, break a bunch of stuff, and hurt himself, and we cannot do that as responsible pigeon owners. Look at you, jail boy. Mr. Jail Man in the jail. Anyway, so today we of course have yet another look at our favorite topic, the topic that comes up literally like 4 different times a year because people just don't know how to act. And that is people's insistence that Christmas entirely is a pagan holiday, which is it's just not true. There's a little bit more specific stuff going on in here than that. But before we get into all that, again, hello, my name is Sarada Stresen, and I am a Christian witch content creator, writer, educator, specifically a writer of this book right here, which also has a sequel coming out in now less than a month. I have just put in the first print order of the sequel, which is very exciting. And if you're wondering what these books even are, and if you also looked at the phrase Christian witch and said, what the hell are you talking about, lady? Don't worry. Book 1 is awesome because it quite literally addresses all the verses you're no doubt Googling right now that say that witchcraft is bad and explains what's actually going on sociopolitically, historically, all that kind of stuff. In those verses, it goes over, beginner witch tips, witch tools, all the stuff our ancestors used to do, the kind of 2,000 years between the last pages of the Bible being written and now in terms of tradition, and a lot of other interesting stuff that just gets people a little bit more established in what the hell we're talking about. However, book 2, now we're getting into the meta. We're getting into the underpinnings of book 1, right? Because when you do book 1 and you're doing all the magic and all the cute stuff with the crystals and the whatever, that's great. But all of the background philosophy and theology behind it all, that's book 2. That's why it's an intermediate's guide to the mystic journey. Will there be an advanced guide? Oh, you bet. One day. But right now I'm still in the afterglow of finishing book 2. So I'm spending the rest of December basically under 30 blankets with some hot cocoa and minding my goddamn business. It's a lot of work doing this stuff, man. It's a lot of work. Anyway, though, if you don't want to grab a book just yet, that's totally fine. I understand. Before you invest any real USD dollars into that, by all means, come take a poke around this YouTube channel. Go ahead, like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell because we do post a video here every single Friday. And if you want to get these videos 2 weeks early and ad-free, and you want to support my content that much more because you just love me so much, first of all, I appreciate you. Second of all, Patreon's where it's at. Patreon's where you're going to find all these videos 2 weeks early and ad-free for you to watch, as well as a lot of other stuff that I post there for everyone throughout the week. But without further ado, let's get into this conversation. So this video is not going to be just me yapping the entire way. We're going to take a look at a couple posts so you can see what I'm talking about when I tell you that every time a seasonal event happens, I want to lay down. I have curated quite a few posts that exemplify the kind of rhetoric that comes around around Christmas, around Easter, and all that kind of stuff, but we're specifically looking at Christmas right now, so let's take a look as we go just one by one in here. Me when I'm trying to explain the pagan origins of Christmas and how the church stole these pagan traditions to make it their own, how Jesus is not a Capricorn, and this is why I celebrate Yule. Alright. The pagan origins of Christmas? No, Christmas has always been a Christian holiday, but it is funny though when people are like, well, Jesus isn't a Capricorn because he wasn't actually born on December 25th. Here's the thing. Again, I look at posts like this and I say, the nuance is being wiped away. Like, imagine if you took a multi-layered, like a 3D object. Actually, you know what? Here's a good example. Imagine if you took one of these, right? These cool little book nooks that you can kind of build in, and they're kind of 3D, and they've got all these layers, and they go into your bookshelf, and they kind of look like a little world tucked away in there. Aren't those cool? Very cool. But imagine if you took one of those and just squanched it into a flat image and took a lot of that detail, nuance, and intrigue out. That's what I get in posts like these. When I look at posts like these, there's so much stuff going on here, but it's also surface level and surface level understanding. Yes, we know that Jesus was not actually born on December 25th. There are all kinds of weird reasons and calculations going on that people have theorized and posited and tossed around for a long time as to why it's on December 25th. But all I know is that, honestly, in terms of a liturgical year, right, because this story plays out every year, that's kind of what the liturgy is, it just dots a lot of I's and crosses a lot of T's to have Jesus, which is the light of the world, right, the light of the darkness, coming up on the winter solstice when the sun is, growing again, and then by extension having his cousin's birthday, which his cousin St. John the Baptist was born 6 months before, being right there to catch also that summer solstice, right, with the height of the sun's power in the proclaiming of all these things, and also the rest of the Passion story, right, Pentecost and all this other kinds of stuff where everything's at its peak. It's a rhythm, it's a cycle, and it all kind of goes really well together. But how the church stole these pagan traditions? No, these weren't stolen. None of this was stolen, and especially not on purpose. Again, right? We can think of themes that the church fathers would have said, yeah, sure, cool. These are analogous to our themes, and so it makes sense to put these here. There is certainly some theories that, once upon a time they were trying to calculate the exact date of the crucifixion, and therefore they sent it 9 months back. For some reason they thought that 9 months from when he was crucified would be the conception point. I don't know. Listen, nothing about church math ever makes any goddamn sense. But then that would be a reason why it would be in December, right? March, the 3rd month, to December, the 12th month. Great. There's a bunch of different theories and reasons. But at the end of the day, it may be that just the Christians didn't come off a spaceship and therefore they weren't created in a vacuum. Their ideas weren't created in a vacuum. Their themes weren't created in a vacuum. The problem is, though, with this kind of thing, we get all these weird ideas around what it means to steal and what it means to take. I'm actually going to pop you over to Dan McClellan for a hot second, who not only demonstrates exactly why academic integrity and rigorous, searching for sources is important, but also why these claims are just way too surface level and flippant to really be taken seriously. So take it away, Dan.
Folks who insist that Christmas was originally a pagan holiday that was just stolen by Christians have not done their research. Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion, and 'tis the season for social media to be saturated with claims about how Christmas was originally the celebration of Mithras's birthday, or Sol Invictus, or Saturnalia, or the Wild Hunt, or Siberian shamans who eat Avenida muscaria mushrooms. And overwhelmingly, all of these claims are rooted in someone just squinting at a non-Christian practice or festival and saying, that reminds me an awful lot of something that goes on in Christmas. Therefore, it must have been stolen by Christians. Because when you dig down and try to find either artifacts, archaeological evidence, or primary texts to demonstrate that there was actually opportunity, means, and motive for actually borrowing from one society into another, you don't find it. In fact, overwhelmingly, these things are at far distances from each other in time and space. If you'd like a wonderful illustration of what happens when you drill down into the data regarding the origins of the Christmas tree, I would highly recommend you check out the Religion for Breakfast video, the very recent origins of the Christmas tree. Now, some folks who make this claim will point to some academic literature that cites a source from the 4th century claiming that Christians knowingly and explicitly changed the date of Christmas in order to take over a pagan festival and appeal to pagans. But let's see what happens when we actually do the research and try to track down the primary sources. Chasing the Sun by Richard Cohen came out in 2010, and this was the first text I was directed to for this claim. And here is the quote on page 27. It says, "The advantages of Christmas Day being celebrated then were obvious, as the Christian commentator Cyrus wrote. It was a custom of the pagans to celebrate on the same 25 December the birthday of the sun, at which they kindled lights in token of festivity. In these solemnities and revelries the Christians also took part. Accordingly, when the church authorities perceived that the Christians had a leaning to this festival, they took counsel and resolved that the true nativity should be solemnized on that day." Now, there is a footnote marker here, footnote number 6. Let's check that out. So if we go look it up, the first thing to note here is that footnote number 6 starts with a CF, which basically means compare, which means we're not actually getting the source for this quote that was directly quoted in the text. It says CF Cambridge Medieval History, Volume 4, Part 1, page 43. All right, let's check it out. Here's the right text, Cambridge Medieval History, Volume 4, Part 1 from 1966. But page 43 does not share any word from that quote and has absolutely no relevance to the quote. So that book quoted something and then did not direct us to the source for it. But we can find that quote elsewhere. Ron Hutton published The Stations of the Sun in 1996. And we find precisely that quote on page 1, introduced thusly: "The reason for the choice of this date and the success of it was stated with admirable candor by a Christian writer, the scriptor Cyrus, in the late 4th century." That would seem to be pretty authoritative. Let's look up where this comes from. Now, Hutton actually provides a source saying this text is considered by Gaston Halsberg in his book The Cult of Sol Invictus from 1972, also by Fraser from his book Adonis, Attis, Osiris. So here's Halsberg's 1972 book published by Brill. And here we see the quote described in this way: "The authors whom we consulted on this point are unanimous in admitting the influence of the pagan celebration held in honor of Deus Sol Invictus on the 25th of December, the Natalis Invicti on the Christian celebration of Christmas." And then we see the Latin quoted at the bottom, which is attributed to one scriptor Cyrus from Assumanum Bibliotheca Orientalis, Volume 2. So let's go look at what Fraser says. Here is Fraser's volume. So here is Fraser sharing roughly the same quote, and then down at the bottom saying this is quoted by C.A. Credner in a paper entitled De Natalitiorum Christi. He also says it is from Mommsen. The footnote goes on to the next page, but it refers to a publication called Corpus Inscriptionum Latinarum, Volume 1, Part 2, from the early 19th century. Now, here is that paper by Credner. And in this footnote, we find that quotation in Syriac as well as in Latin, and it is attributed to Assimani Bibliotheca Orientalis, Volume 2, which is the second time we've seen that quoted as the source. Now, I couldn't find a photocopy of the original Corpus Inscriptionum Latinarum, but this is a later printing of the same text. And at the bottom half of this page, we see another reference to the scriptor Cyrus. We see the quote in Latin in italics, and we see it attributed for the third time to Assumanum Bibliotheca Orientalis, Volume 2. So it sounds like that's where everybody's getting this quote. So let's go check that out. Now, this text was published in 1721, and it is a collection of a bunch of transcriptions of ancient manuscripts. Now, those three quotations directed us to page 164, where we do find this Syriac text. And on the right, on the bottom half in the italics, you see the Latin translation, which roughly matches the quote as it is represented in the more recent literature. However, we have some issues here. One, this is not from the 4th century at all, and nowhere claims to be from the 4th century. This is a transcription of a manuscript written by one Dionysius Barsalibi, who died in 1171 CE. The second problem is this is actually not Barsalibi's text. The text that is there in red, the non-italicized Latin, says that this is something written in the margin by an anonymous Syrian that tries to prove this claim about the date being decided because Christians wanted to appropriate this pagan celebration. And so what we have is a manuscript that dates to around 1170 CE that has a later marginal note that makes this claim about December 25th. So this is a late 12th century or maybe even early 13th century marginal note that gets confused as a 4th century Christian writing this claim. Additionally, this 1721 description of whoever wrote this marginal note in this 12th century manuscript as an anonymous Syrian writer would later be misrepresented as the actual name of an author, Cyrus, and that author would be dated to the 4th century CE, which comes from absolutely nowhere. That's just something that someone made up, and other people quoted that without bothering to go look at the primary text to verify anything. And that happens from time to time in the scholarship. But this is the only actual claim I can find in academic scholarship to have a source for this claim that the date of Christmas or the celebration of Christmas was originally appropriated from a pagan festival, and it turns out to be a mistake. Now, this is not to say that there has been no appropriation whatsoever of practices and conventions by Christians celebrating Christmas. Christmas has been celebrated for probably around 1800 years in many different ways around the world, and those ways of celebrating have changed over time. And certainly, people who have converted to Christianity have brought their practices with them, and certainly there have been leaders within Christianity who have been incentivized to appropriate conventions and practices into Christmas that serves their structuring of power and values. This is not to deny that the way that we celebrate Christmas today in Eurocentric countries has been influenced heavily by non-Christian European traditions. That is pretty much a given. But what it does mean is that the claim that Christmas originates in a pagan festival that was stolen by Christians is not supported by any data whatsoever. Right now, all it is supported by is squinting at things and saying, this reminds me of the other thing, therefore it must be related and it must have been stolen by Christians, and the data simply do not support that.
So as he mentions in there, Religion for Breakfast does have some videos on this as well when it comes to pagan traditions and things like that. And also another really interesting creator, which is Zahara Jacobi, or also known as Jew Witches, is a Jewish witch who also will tell you, per this video, that this whole thing people say is very, very, very misguided, and specifically seems to be targeting Germanic and Norse pagans, not any of the other ones. So let's talk about that for a second, right? When we talk about these traditions and things, when we talk about Saturnalia, which is down here in the Roman Empire, and also Yule or Yule, which is all the way up there in Scandinavia, here's the thing. The concept of light being born in the darkness is not exactly new. Okay, it's not new, and given that we are all people, and that people in the same kind of environment will generally observe the same rhythms of the year, considering that's a phenomenon that exists, it's not like Christians would have necessarily been wanting for any kind of themes or influence or yearly rhythm or ideas themselves. A lot of the Christians that became Christian, they already existed in certain cultures with certain histories and certain contexts. They did not exist in a vacuum. Again, they did not walk off a spaceship. So they would have already been familiar with these seasonal cycles, and they would have looked at their gospel story that they spend a lot of time remembering and reading over and over again and reflecting on and going over, and realize that, you know, rather than try to pin the whole damn thing down every single time, the entire story every single time from top to bottom, they could fit it into basically a year's worth of meditation and celebration and observance, which is what liturgy is. I will say again and again. The liturgical calendar, the church calendar that goes through periods like Advent up into Christmas, Lent up into Easter, and all these other things, it's to help kind of remind us of the story of God and His people and His Son in a year-long situation, bite-sized, piece by piece, one day at a time, to spend the whole year in that constant sway and flow of the year. Therefore, might there have been some crossover between Saturnalia and, I don't know, Christmas? Sure, but as we saw in Dan's video, not every culture really does the same thing at the same time for Christmas, right? We got to remember there was a switch in calendars from the Julian to the Gregorian. And actually, fun fact, this is why my fiance's family, who are Ukrainian, they would actually kind of have like a second Ukrainian Christmas in January, because it was all based on a different calendar once upon a time. There was different calendars, there was all these things. There's also different cultural connections that have Christians from all over the world doing slightly different things to recognize this rhythm and this yearly cycle. And also, again, people converting, they don't just forget everything about who they were and what they were doing before that. So, obviously, if you crack open a Bible, of course, there's not going to be any mention of pine trees and holly in there, because those are specific to a more, especially northern and western European environment. But that's okay. That just means that the gospel story is being fitted to new areas and to new cultural connotations and understandings and connections. The church did not go out of their way to steal these things. The converts coming to Christianity looked at pieces of not their religion so much as their culture and said, oh yeah, I can tie this together, I can keep this, I can keep an integral part of who I and my tribe and my people are in this new religious context. That's what's going on. There's another one. You can't celebrate Christmas, you're not a Christian. Even old Christmas was once Yule. I mean, again, yes, but also no. There's definitely like a lot of weirdness, right? Like if we think of the Puritans who came and messed around in America, they definitely have those quips like Yuletide is Fooltide, right? Like they have those situations where, you know, they thought that any kind of ritual at all was something like to be thrown away because it wasn't in the Bible or whatever. But again, that's part of what makes us a living tradition and a living religion, right? Christmas was always called Christmas. Yule is a separate situation with separate meanings, with separate gods, with separate traditions, with separate cultural connotations. Some places, again, like Scandinavian countries, might just have this time of year be synonymous. They might be calling it Yule instead of Christmas, but that's for like a whole seasonal thing, like the whole thing going on. And again, that's because their culture specifically is the one that had it. Here's my issue, though, as I look at these, right? As I look at, oh, they stole pagan traditions, and like when we look at Dan's examples of, you know, messy scholarship, all these people saying, oh, pagan tradition. When we remember a Jew which is saying, oh yeah, convenient that all those traditions, all this paganism is specifically from this one corner of Europe. Yeah, we're gonna bring that up because Yule's not the only winter solstice celebration, even outside of Christmas. People always forget Slavic Kolyada. People always forget, like, pretty much any other culture's name for, understanding of, interpretation of, and traditional remembrance of the winter solstice. People keep using pagan as this blanket term as if the entire swath of Europe was all, before Christianity, doing the same thing at the same time. But no one's accusing the Scandinavians with Yule of stealing Saturnalia. No one is accusing the Slavic people of stealing Kolyada from, say, Saturnalia or from Yule. So we have to look at ourselves honestly and say, is it really stealing, or is it just simply doing what humans always have done, which is understanding the worldly rhythm through certain stories and religious contexts and meditations that make sense to them? How about this one? Me watching Christians decorate their pagan Yule tree with a pentagram on top as they prepare to invite a spirit into their house and bring them gifts. They told me I'm going to hell for being a witch. Listen, first off, again, I think I have discussed this before and I'll say it again. The Christmas tree specifically is not at all pagan, actually. This is the really funny part. The whole concept of putting a tree in your house and decking it out with lights and ornaments and weird shit is actually very specifically Christian, and it's also very new in the entire grand scheme of these things, right? Christmas trees are, by legend, thought to be invented by Martin Luther, who saw the stars gleaming through a pine tree one night, thought it was really cool, cut it down, put very not fire-safe candles in the fucking tree in his house, and there we go. That was the birth of the first Christmas tree, and it was something that was very specifically contained to, like, Germany, to a very specific part of Germany, no less, until it started gaining more interest and intrigue in other parts of the world, like England, like Russia, and of course, like America. America was around by the time, the Christmas tree became widespread. In fact, Americans looking at the Christmas tree and being really enamored with it is why it became such a widespread tradition across all of these different, Christian peoples in the West to begin with. Until then, it was really just contained to one little part of Germany. And no one else really did much with it. And there wasn't a single way to decorate the tree either. They were doing all kinds of weird shit. They were putting like entire pastries on the damn tree that you could just kind of chew on and eat at any point. What the fuck? There was all kinds of weird stuff going on with the Christmas tree, but that itself is not pagan. I think a lot of people get that confused for the Yule tree, or the Yule log rather, which it's not actually a tree that goes up in your house like a Christmas tree. It's a log that you set on fire. Basically, you chop a tree down and you just kind of feed it wood chipper style into the damn furnace all winter long. It's not at all the same thing. It's not at all the same application. It's not at all the same idea. So when people say stuff like, oh, the Christmas tree itself is actually, it always has been pagan, no! The concept of evergreen being a symbol of life, even in a season of cold and death, yeah, sure. In this area where we have winters and pine trees, that is a cultural connotation that gets carried over to Christmas. That's the pagan part of Christmas, is that idea of evergreen being something that we deck out our house with in this cold, cold, cold winter. Because obviously, in the desert where the Bible was, story was taking place, it doesn't snow and there are no pine trees. So obviously, this part would be from these pre-Christian eras and these pre-Christian connotations, because that's what people had available to them, because that's what people used to symbolize these things. That's what people used to then, when they were becoming Christian, symbolize core themes and tenets of the gospel story and Christ's birth as well. It's weird. People act like, I don't know, pagans have a fucking copyright or a patent on evergreen, which is weird. Even the pentacle, the star. Stars? I don't know how this became a claim. Whereas this person right here was actually very funny that I saw earlier. This person insists that Santa and burning candles are actually pagan. Christians had no concept of candles or lamps at all before paganism, I guess. They stole that idea, I guess. Likewise, Santa Claus, Santa Claus, Saint Nicholas is pagan? Fam. Bro, like, I can't express to you enough the silliness of some of these things, like burning candles as if all of humanity hasn't done some form of this or forever, or specifically bastardizations of saints like Santa Claus being secretly pagan. The oldest reference we have to any kind of Santa Claus as we now know it is actually from this old poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," right? Like, this in here is where we start getting our very first inkling of this modern Santa that we understand now. And it has nothing to do with a lot of what people claim of Odin and Woden and just running around giving little friggin' trinkets and gifts like that. This is one of those weird looping mythologies here where Christians looked at old pre-Christian stuff that they didn't have any living ancestors to really tell them about, grafted their ideas onto it, and now are repeating this vicious cycle of looking at Christian traditions, Christmas and all these other things, and grafting them onto modern neo-paganism that we don't actually have any sources for. Things like Santa, like fucking Christmas trees, like the star. How could the star be pre-Christian when that is like a key fixture of the Bible story? The three kings navigating to Jesus via a star. Why else do you think the fucking star... We have all these funny, goofy things, right, when we look at all these claims people make online, and they just make them because they hear other people make them. And they hear other people make them because there's just this culture right now, this situation where people want to feel vindicated. And this is really my theory of why people repeat messy scholarship, misquoted things, half-baked ideas, and so on when it comes to Christmas and these other holidays. It's because a lot of times people are coming at it from an ex-evangelical perspective, which there's nothing wrong with being ex-evangelical. There's nothing wrong with escaping what is, in my opinion, kind of a dog shit understanding of Christianity to begin with, which causes these problems to begin with. There's nothing wrong with deconstructing or any of that. The problem is, per this book that we've talked about before, Laura E. Anderson, right, When Religion Hurts You, the way this kind of religion functions that people leave in the first place, this kind of high control religion, is that it does work to turn off your critical thinking and make it so that you don't trust information that is not given to you by your pastor, your priest, or whoever's your religious authority. Because if you get it wrong by leaning on your own understanding, you very well could damn yourself to hell forever, right? And you could do all these terrible bad things. Because of that, people don't learn how to do scholarship. When I saw Dan going off over there and saying what he was saying about how he went down this rabbit hole of trying to find this source, and how it was so badly misquoted, and how it was just one big error that has just been repeated as fact since. Oh my goodness, it really goes to show that a lot of people, honestly, again, of no fault of their own, they don't have the skills, they don't have the tools to be able to do this honest scholarship that they need to do, right? They don't have these tools, and so they end up repeating these kind of goofy sentiments all the time. And they do both neo-pagan Reconstructionism and Christianity a massive disservice, as well as their own understanding. They do themselves and their own spiritual practice a big disservice. It's my honest theory that people keep repeating these same misnomers, these same just complete fabrications, because again, it vindicates them, it makes them feel better, it makes it feel, it's pleasing to their black and white worldview that something can be either wrong or right, no in between. And it also positions themselves to feel better about leaving the religion, because it was actually always fake, and it was always just witchcraft anyway, and it was always just all these other things. It was always some fabrication. It never had any real substance that wasn't stolen, right? I think this is why people say stuff like this. I think people repeat these ideas because they want to feel justified in having left that old faith. They want to feel, like they found the real truth, and that they found the real facts, because that's what was drilled into them their whole life, was this idea that you need to be right, you need to have the truth, you need to have the facts. And the problem with these people is that just because they went to a new religion now, be it witchcraft, be it paganism, whatever else, doesn't mean they unlearned that inner machinations of how their brain works. They can say that they don't believe this surface level religious structure and paradigm of Christianity anymore, but they didn't do any work to undo how their brain actually processes and accepts new information. So they didn't unlearn the Christian victim complex. They didn't unlearn the persecution complex. They didn't unlearn the distrust of scholastic authority. They didn't unlearn all of the, distrust of anyone outside a spiritual leader, which now they are their own spiritual leader, so they just kind of do what feels right and true to them rather than anything else. And they also did not learn how to do this kind of research to begin with. They never learned how to hold two ideas in tension. They never learned that the world is a bit more complicated than correct and incorrect, and so they continue this goofiness. But again, as I said, there are plenty of Christian and Christmas specifically traditions that absolutely have a root in pre-Christian myth and ideology and things like that, right? There are many pieces of different parts of Europe and their their Christmas traditions that very clearly and very obviously come from pre-Christian stuff. For instance, the Austrian and Bavarian Krampuslauf, Krampus being the Christmas demon. This definitely doesn't fucking show up in the Bible, the Christmas demon. There's also the Père Fouettard, the whipping father in France, which fills a similar role. There are all these spooks and scary things that are out nipping around that definitely come from pre-Christian ideas of the winter time being a time of underworld spirits like the Slavic people believed. There's tons and tons and tons of that stuff. But these are signs of syncretic belief, of culture. And I think this is what upsets me the most when people say this. Listen, it's not that I give a shit that people don't like Christianity. This has never been the thing. and maybe for some people looking in, they'll say, well, you're just mad that they're dogging Christianity. No, I could give a fuck about that. What I really care about, though, is that people deny the resilience of our ancestors by basically insisting that all the work they did to repurpose and therefore keep their old spiritual traditions, to weave them into the season's mythos with Christianity, is a farce, is just the church's ploy, when in fact the church didn't want people to do this at all. In fact, let me back up, because Krampus is a fantastic example. Krampus is definitely some kind of, from what we can see, maybe some kind of forest spirit, some kind of strange, maybe dangerous spirit, maybe a spirit that would be warned away from, right? A symbol perhaps of the dangers of the forest at night and in the dark when the wolves were roaming and the creatures were hungry, right? Maybe, but Krampus, and then also Frau Bertha, which is a more Austrian/Slovenian winter goddess on par with Frau Holla, more in the north. These spirits, they had a place in syncretic Christian mythos before the church tried to demonize them to get people away from them. Frau Bertha especially is really fascinating because in Catholic tradition, you got your babies baptized at birth so that if they died at birth, which was very common, unfortunately, in those days, they wouldn't be stuck in the in-between, in limbo, between heaven and hell, right? Because you couldn't go to heaven if you weren't baptized, so went the thinking. But in this area specifically of, like, you know, Austria, southern Germany kind of, but mostly Austria and even northern Slovenia, Frau Bertha was a spirit of the winter and of the dead children, and she would take the children to her special land where they would be safe and happy and they could avoid limbo even though they hadn't been baptized because they were resting with her. She was the keeper of these souls of little children. They would follow her and she would take care of them. That's what these people believed. And the church said, no, absolutely not. That's actually an evil witch who is out to hurt your children, who is out to punish your children. Do not give your children to her. Do not pray to her for any kind of anything. Do not think that she's here to help you. She's actually the evil witch Perchta. Perchta being this kind of like old witchy, kind of Baba Yaga-esque almost kind of person who would send her Krampus creatures, her Perchten, after people and would, you know, just run through the streets and being crazy like that. And Krampus himself could not be demonized. He could not be removed completely, right? He could not be let go of. And so instead he became a figure of evil who would put children in a basket and take them down to hell. That's the kind of stuff the church would do. If we want to talk about the church screwing up old pre-Christian tradition, that's the kind of stuff that the church would do. They would do everything possible to demonize, to make evil these old traditions so people would be scared of them and would no longer hold them near and dear. Obviously, culture is very deeply ingrained, and even though the church tried to get these people away from these spirits and away from these ideas, all it did was give them yet another way, another vessel, another means to include them in the story. So now Krampus is someone who follows St. Nicholas around. I think Krampus's day is like the December 5th, right before St. Nicholas's day on December 6th, because if you were a bad child, you wouldn't get coal in your stocking like the Americans did with Santa. You would have Krampus come and take you to hell for being bad. So it became a good way to disincentivize bad behavior throughout the year. If you were good, St. Nicholas would come bring you gifts and leave them in your shoe on December 6th instead. As I've said many times now, the thing is that a lot of these pre-Christian things that have made their way into Christmas, they're not there because Christians stole different parts of our religion. They're there because converts did not want to let go of what made them unique and special as a people, the cultural aspect. That's what they took with them into these new holidays. And it makes me so sad when people write that off, when they write off that ingenuity, when they write off that persistence and that resilience in trying to keep what made them, even as a new religion was brought to them, whether by force or by diplomacy through the missionaries. Regardless of how these people came to convert, what matters is that they held on to what made their culture special, what made them who they are, and that's very important. And we can't just write that off as something that the church of all institutions purposely stole and bastardized. That's not what happened. Elements of pre-Christian belief, like the evergreen, like the Yule log, like, you know, wearing masks and running around, which is a lot like Samhain, but also would happen in the Slavic cultures, right, during the winter, like wassailing, like all these other things, like the wild hunt, that would kind of sort of be something like the 12 days of Christmas. It'd be something around that time where the gods would come through, like all this kind of stuff, like burning down big statues and big bonfires in the winter. All of these things, we should be very happy stayed with us, that our ancestors decided to figure out, repurpose, and fit into the religion that was then brought onto them. And we should also remember that, again, humans really aren't that different from each other. We all have these ideas of a light in the darkness, be it a solar god like Mithras, or I don't know, Dashborg, or anything like that, be it Jesus, right, the light of the world. It doesn't really matter what's going on. We all observe the rhythms of the world, and we all observe them through the lens of whatever cultural or religious story we hold dear to us. And that keeps us connected to ourselves, to our cultures, to the rhythm of the 365-day calendar, and to the divine that made it all in our own special ways. There's no reason to sit here and act like Christmas, for all of its, Christian flavor, is any less valid than Kolyada, than Yule, than Saturnalia, than any of these other traditions that go on, because all of them are fundamentally doing the same thing, just with different narrative paradigms on it, basically. And there are so many more fun and interesting Christmas and wintertime traditions that come along after this, like the house blessing, right? The house blessing, in which we reference the three kings to put in chalk over our doorstep for the new year, like Epiphany, which commemorates the three kings getting to Jesus through that star that we were talking about. And all these other kinds of ideas, right? And there's also a lot of interesting history mixed in, like the 12 days of Christmas, according to this one site, being a reference to many different feasts and other things. The very song on the 12 days of Christmas being kind of like a secret hidden code for Catholics who were being persecuted in England during the Tudor and Elizabethan era with the rise of Protestantism in the Anglican Church. Like, there's so much more going on here than just Christians stole tree. And that's what annoys the hell out of me, again, because these people don't have any concept of nuance. They don't have any concept of depth in their understanding. It's all just, it's either 100% Christian or it's 100% pagan. There can never be any in between. There can never be any other events that happened. There can never be any other context or nuance. It all has to be just that. Christian or pagan. And if it's not this, then it has to be that. That kind of thinking is what people really have to deconstruct when they leave religion, and they just gotta put some respect on their ancestors' name for at least frickin' trying to stay who they are and all of this shit. This is a conversation that, unfortunately, we just have to keep having. We have to keep having, we have to keep pushing, because people need to understand that, yes, there are some pre-Christian elements that got into Christmas, and that's okay. And no, it wasn't done there on purpose by the church, but rather by our ancestors. And no, we don't need to erase all pagan elements out of Christmas any more than we need to erase all Christian elements out of any other cultural festivals going on at this time. They can all exist together. We can all celebrate together. We can all have a great time together observing the same ideas of light in the darkness. We're all doing it in some way, and that's how we do it differently is great and special and fun, and we shouldn't feel the need to water down one or sanitize another to just have a good time doing that. So I hope this little tangent here, this little speech of mine, gives you some ideas, shows you what you got to do and why and how when it comes to these kinds of claims and these kinds of interesting things, and just gives you some more peace of mind that if you want to celebrate Christmas or Yule or whatever, or both at the same damn time, you are well within your rights to do so. Because at the end of the day, we're all celebrating the same thing in one way or another anyway. So, I'll see you next time for some more good chats, and I bid you adieu. See ya!